Hi everybody, it's Dave again, and I wanted to talk with you a little bit during this little mini lecture on some further information from the book Instructional Leadership That Works that I referenced last lesson about a concept called first and second order change. Marzano and his cohorts in that book talked about factors that influence student achievement, and he divided them into different groups. School-based factors, teacher-based factors, and student-based factors. The ones that we're primarily concerned with in this class are those that are school-based because they are under the auspices of instructional leaders, usually school principals. And we're really going to hone in on the first two, as you see here, guaranteed and viable curriculum and challenging goals and effective feedback. But I wanted you to have a chance to look at all the factors. So you can see that the teacher factors are instructional strategies, the specific way lessons are put together, classroom management, and classroom curriculum design. And then we also know that there are factors related to the student and the student's family, and you can see those come forward here. I've kind of like this diagram from Marzano that shows that around all of these factors is sort of a constant pressure from leadership, a good kind of pressure, a pressure to hold everything together and to keep it tight. And I really like this as a visual schematic of that. Now, when Marzano and Waters and McNulty did their book, they based it on a meta-analysis, and I think you're becoming more and more familiar with that term. It means taking lots and lots of studies, in this case hundreds, and finding a way to kind of distill them into one big study so that you can look at the commonalities involved. And John Hattie is currently the hottest author doing meta-analysis. We'll talk about him later in this course, but Marzano is very good at it as well. And they found, doing their meta-analysis, that there was an average correlation between instructional leadership behavior and school achievement of 0.25 when everything is kind of operating in the norm. And that means with those kinds of leadership behaviors, those students usually gain 10 percentile points in school achievement. There are some factors that mediate leadership. The focus of the change, and we've just looked at those. We had those school factors, the teacher factors, and the student factors. We're not going to dwell too much on those today, but the other one is the order of the change. And there are two types of change. There's first order change and second order change. Leadership for first order change emphasizes relationships. It establishes strong lines of communication. The instructional leader is an advocate for the school, provides resources, maintains visibility, protects teachers from distractions, creates culture of collaboration, and looks for and celebrates successes. You can see at a glance, these are positive things. These are things that if I were going to interview you for a job right now, you would want to tell me that those are things you would espouse. First order change is incremental, hardly noticeable at times. It's reversible. It is made up of small steps that don't depart dramatically from the past. The next most logical step is how some authors describe it. It's managing the daily life of a school. And research tells us that all 21 of those responsibilities that we looked at in Unit 1 are related to first order change. Now, leadership for second order is a very different deal. This requires the instructional leader to shake up the status quo, hold everyone's feet to the fire, propose new ideas, operate from strong beliefs, tolerate ambiguity and dissent. Boy, that's a biggie. You may have seen that in last week's presentation I had that highlighted in red. It's a real important thing for an instructional leader to be able to tolerate dissent. The instructional leader needs to be able to talk research and theory, to create explicit goals for change, to define success in terms of those goals, and it almost always requires new learning. Now, a quick glance at that list, that doesn't look quite so positive, does it? Those are not things that feel quite so good to us. They might have an element of excitement to it, but when you have to wear the responsibility that comes with initiating that kind of change, it becomes a very serious matter very quickly. Second order change is best not entered into lightly. It's dramatic, it's not incremental. It is not reversible. Once you head down that path, it's pretty difficult to go back. It manifests itself only in the context of a specific issue that is being addressed or a problem that is being solved. And it's related to 7 of the 21 responsibilities. Those 7 in rank order of how important they are in dealing with second order change. Knowledge of curriculum, instruction, and assessment. The function of being an optimizer. The function of intellectual stimulation. The function of being a change agent. The function of monitoring and evaluating. The function of flexibility. And the function of ideals and beliefs. Some of the responsibilities of the 21 are actually negatively affected during second order change in many cases. 4 that leap out are culture, communication, order, and input. In other words, leadership for second order change might have to endure team spirit, cooperation, and common language can deteriorate as a result of an innovation. So the culture actually declines. Communication can deteriorate as a result of an innovation. So communication declines. Order and routine can deteriorate as a result of the innovation, so order can decline. The level of input from all members of the staff can deteriorate as a result of the innovation, so input can decline. So a leader might work very hard to build those 4 areas up, only to find that when faced with a change that is of such magnitude that it requires second order practice, some of those things crumble beneath. Second order change can really take a great personal toll on leaders. There will almost always be periods of frustration and even anger from staff members. Here's a little thinking prompt for you right here in kind of the middle of our presentation. Which statement best describes the change your school or district is engaged in? Are you currently engaged in first order change? Are you currently engaged in second order change? I think it's probably noteworthy to point out that there are times, as we will discuss, that you have to confront an issue with second order change. So it's not something you can just simply avoid. But I think you want to pick your battles wisely there. And it's very important, and I can't stress this enough, that you have on board not only the people who work with you at your building, but the people to whom you report. Because when discontent starts spilling out, you want to make sure that the person who writes your evaluation understands and is very supportive of the kind of change that you're trying to bring about in your building. Let's go back for a minute to the factors that influence achievement. Let's just look at a couple of them at the school-based level. The first is a guaranteed and viable curriculum. Lots of people use that term now. Marzano was the first to kind of coin that. Let's take a little deeper look at that. What does viable mean? Well, if you look it up in any dictionary, you're going to come up with synonyms like feasible, capable of being done. So instructional leaders have to be sure that a curriculum is viable before it can be guaranteed. If you wanted to teach all the standards in the national documents, you'd have to change schooling from K-12 to K-22. There would be about 255 standards across 14 subject areas, 3,500 benchmarks requiring 13,000 hours of class time. There are only 9,000 hours of instruction time available with our current schedules. So you would need another 15,500 hours of instruction to cover the 3,500 benchmarks. So unless you've done quite a bit of work at your building level, it's doubtful that the curriculum truly is viable. Let's take a look at the second one, challenging goals and effective feedback. Now, in Marzano's book, you'll see, if you ever pick it up or if some of you may own it, you'll see this next couple pages right in there, and it has to do with standards-based report cards. So if we know from the research that effective feedback is important to student achievement and that that is a school-driven function, then how could we in good conscience go with an old-fashioned report card that simply has a letter grade by a subject? And I know lots of schools and lots of school districts throughout the state of Colorado have wrestled with this. Some of you are probably in buildings where this is old hat and you've been doing some kind of standards-based reporting to parents for quite some time. This would be a huge second-order change for a school building. I can remember a middle school principal that I'd hired back in my days at Lewis Palmer, who was an extremely knowledgeable person. She had a real skill set as far as knowledge about curriculum and instruction, and she was just gifted in that way. But during her first year with us, she decided to embark on a kind of a fast track switch to a standards-based report card. And she kind of mentioned it to me in passing, and it just sent up all kinds of red flags because at the same time that she was considering this, I had watched as the culture there had kind of crumbled. She was a pretty strong-willed person. She wasn't known for her collaboration skills, and she had already kind of set off some fire alarms with the staff. So for her to go into that degree, that level of magnitude, if you will, that early in her tenure was, in my opinion, going to be headed for disaster. So I tried to talk with her about how I really supported the goal of getting there, but I wanted to work with her some on the timeline and how we would roll that out, how we would announce it, what kind of resources we would bring in. And it just didn't settle very well with her. And we had quite a debate over that. I wish I could tell you it ended really well, but it didn't. She kind of decided that the whole deal of educational leadership was not for her, and she got completely out of it. So I don't think it was over just that one issue, but I only take the little time to tell a little anecdote because those kinds of changes are humongous, and you really need to have your ducks in a row, and that's a real understatement, but you really need to have a good organizational scheme to take them on. There's just the second slide from the standards-based notebook that appears in Marzano. And this is somewhat dated. He wrote this thing back in 2005. Some of you have some much better ones. Technology has come a long way since then, and I know some of you have used it to great benefit. Just think again now, kind of go back to the prompts we looked at earlier. For which school level factor is your school or district in most need of attention and resources? Do you think you need more comeuppance, if you will, on a guaranteed and viable curriculum, on challenging goals and effective feedback for students, on parent and community involvement, on a safe and orderly environment, or on collegiality and professionalism? Those are just the 5 things that are directly under the realm of an instructional leader. So how do we pull this all off and also live to fight another day? Well, there are 3 principles based on modern research that might help us think through this a little bit. Principle 1, leadership for change is most effective when carried out by a small group of educators with the principal functioning as a strong, cohesive force. Kind of alluded to this last week when I told you, at one point I thought, as a principal, I could pull all this off on my own, and made myself look very foolish at times in doing that. The research is pretty sound that the best way to govern a school is with a leadership team. One of the common misconceptions about leadership at a school is that it resides with a single individual. And believe it or not, even today in 2014, that's a very pervasive belief. A better paradigm, however, is the intuitively appealing option of a strong leadership team. The principal and other administrators operating as key players and working with a dedicated group of classroom teachers. I had another middle school principal, a different one than the anecdote I just told you, who came into a building where the morale was extremely low. We had to dismiss a principal in that building, and things could not have been much worse. It was kind of an old guard of teachers, and they were really searching for something new. And this principal that we hired really strongly believed in the concept of a leadership team. And when he first got the job, he started talking about that and started promoting that as something that he wanted to recruit people to be a part of. And it kind of fell on deaf ears. I think they thought, this is just more lip service to the same old, same old. But once he launched that thing and people started seeing how viable the concept was and how he really used it in his decision making, and it became their decision making and not his, it just took off. And that, I have never seen the culture of a building turn around as fast in any place I've been. Principle 2, the leadership team must operate in such a way as to provide strong guidance while demonstrating respect for those not on the team. That's a real key. You don't want to create an us versus them. You don't want to create an insider versus outsider scheme. So you have to work really hard at that to be sure that whatever is discussed, processed, decided as the leadership team gets disseminated in a very transparent and natural way to the rest of the staff. Effective principals are actually more indirect in the day-to-day lives of teachers, as the following tables show. Here are some behaviors that are associated with effective school leaders. They do make formal observations. They are accessible to discuss ideas. They seek teacher input into key decisions. They don't just accept it, they seek it. There's a key difference there. They portray confidence in teachers, not just one-on-one, but when they talk to other audiences about their teachers, that confidence comes through. They monitor the continuity of the curriculum. They really understand what the building is trying to pull off, and they understand the scope of it. Here are some behaviors, interestingly enough, that are not associated with effective school leaders. Having frequent staff meetings, using formal rewards for good teaching, reviewing teachers' lesson plans, helping solve specific instructional problems, and giving feedback on specific lessons. I know that one and the reviewing teacher lesson plans might be kind of surprising to you. As we'll see later, there are certainly some teachers who are in need of a more direct approach, and we'll talk about how you identify those teachers and how you work with them. But in general, this is kind of the rules that you need to understand. And the third principle of those is effective leadership for change is characterized by specific behaviors that enhance interpersonal relationships. Optimism is a key, and we've heard it before. We heard it in the last unit about Marzano's book. The power of non-negative thinking, avoiding catastrophizing in times of adversity. No one wants to hear their leader talk about how the sky is falling. Optimistic leadership has the effect of increasing self-esteem and motivation among teachers. Honesty goes without saying. Truthfulness and consistency between words and actions. This is so key. One of my favorite books dates way back to when I was first a high school principal. I was given as a gift the book Credibility by Kouzes and Posner. And I was given that book by an old gentleman named Gil Johnson, who actually owned Johnson Construction, which is one of the very biggest construction companies in Colorado. Gil is no longer alive, and it's being run by his son, Jimmy. But Gil Johnson was amazing. He was awarded a contract to remodel the high school at which I was a principal. And the year before we started that project, he met with me. He rented a room at the Broadmoor Hotel. He brought me in there. He brought a lot of his staff members in there. He brought my boss in there, bought everybody lunch, and he gave us all a copy of the book, Credibility. And he said, you know, Dave, I want to make sure that when we're in the middle of construction up there, and I have subcontracted workers that are walking around that high school campus, and one of them might say something inappropriate to one of those high school girls, for example, walking across the campus, and you get a call from an angry mother about that, I want to make sure that you and I have talked about how we're going to deal with that before we even get there. Wow, that was powerful for me, that he was that astute. And so I spent a lot of time reading that book. And in there, Kouzes and Posner, who are two of my most favorite authors, I didn't have them on the list last week because they're not really educators per se, but I love reading their stuff. The Leadership Challenge is their later book, and it's full of great stuff if you haven't ever seen that one. But they talk at length about the concept of honesty. Consideration. It is a people-growing business, this educational leadership thing. So a people orientation is paramount. A concern for people. There's evidence that teachers who feel that they have been treated with consideration treat their students with consideration. Todd Whitaker, one of my favorite authors that I mentioned last week, has a great quotation about liking teachers. He says, you don't have to like them all, but you have to treat them as if you do. And I think that's really, I love that. I love the way he put that together. Above all else, and if you take me for an on-campus class, you'll get so tired of seeing this. I put it on the board almost every day. I find some way in every lesson to put this little deal on the board. It is so important. And I know it sounds so simple and you would think it's just a given. But in the practice of the day-to-day running of a school, running of a department, some of you are instructional coaches in managing how you're going to impart that kind of coaching to teachers. I think this is key. Do what you say you will do. And I don't mean to talk down to you by reading it with that cadence. I just think it's that important. That's why I took the time to color each letter in the little deal differently. I want you to really think about the significance of that and how doing that is the one sure way I know to have a chance at credibility in this business. You know, we all kind of have heard since we were kids the first line from Dickens' book, A Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. But not too many of us remember the second phrase, and I think it's even more important to us as public education leaders. And that one is, it was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. And I really believe that how we use the research available to us will determine which of those ages we are entering as we go through all of this reform that's on us. Thank you.